History and Culture podcasts are a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to PCN's History and Culture podcast. I'm Phil Beckman. This podcast series features interviews exploring Pennsylvania's rich history from the colonial era to industrialization, the Gettysburg Campaign to sports history, and from art to politics and more.
Today we are speaking with Lea Stephenson, Kenneth R. Woodcock, Curator of Historical American Art at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. When was this academy originally created?
It was originally created in 1805 in Philadelphia.
And who are the main figures behind this organization?
I say the main figures are really artists. Charles Willson Peale was one of the co-founders of Philadelphia artists of the 18th and early 19th century, and he was joined by other artists including William Rush and Philadelphia's civic and business leaders of the day, right around after the American Revolution.
And was there a reason behind the creation of this academy?
It was really a moment to think about how are we going to educate American artists around artwork and an art collection. It was founded because there was no academy or really a formal study center for art in the country, really an emerging republic and a new United States. So artists and businessmen, civic leaders of Philadelphia basically gathered together in Independence Hall and created a charter and an articles of basically association around the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts to create this for the cultivation of the United States.
And how were these classes taught during the time?
During this period of time, it was really through plaster casts of sculpture, and these were European sculptures, whether classical antiquities in ancient Greece and Rome, or European sculptures that were in collections like the Louvre or the Vatican. And they were brought over to Philadelphia as models for students to copy their artwork from, to study from, but also European artworks. Copies of them were sent to Philadelphia for artists to really learn and study from the European masters.
And art is usually privately commissioned. Were these all donations?
In some cases, they were donations from collectors of the Philadelphia area who wanted to really foster the growth of an art collection for the nation. And PAFA was the first art museum in school. And they started donating their collections for that very reason, that students could study from them and also for the public to view them in a larger setting.
And this is set in Philadelphia. How did the public feel about this academy sitting right in the major flow of commerce?
For them, I think it was really a civic center for them. This was a period of time when there was really no museum, no galleries. It was really private collections that you would have to gain access to, even perhaps ticket admission. So this was really a center for the public to finally see annual exhibitions of contemporary artwork and what was going on in the country made by American artists.
Within donations, this is still an academy. How does it continue? Where was the funding coming from?
The funding was largely through subscriptions from some Philadelphia leaders, donations of funds from some of the early directors of the academy, often some funds that are very similar to how museums and civic institutions are run today through grants, subscriptions, funding coming through large philanthropists.
So the academy really referred to these art donations. Can you tell me a bit about the original donations?
The original donations, I'd say, are largely some of those copies of European artwork, the plaster casts that were entering our collection in the early 19th century. And some of these donations, it's amazing, are still in our collection. And they're also early works by American artists. I always like to say, if you look at PAFA's collection, always check those accession numbers. And these numbers tell us when those objects entered our collection. And some read as early as 1816 or 1810, right when PAFA was originating.
And does PAFA still have all of the original art pieces?
Not all of them. So over the years, like many museums, we go through a process at times called deaccessioning. And it's basically comparable to cleaning out your closet. And it's a way for us to still acquire works because we have such a growing collection. And deaccessioning was really focused on some of those European artwork in some cases because we wanted to focus our mission as a museum for American art.
And whenever PAFA needed to move foundations. How did they get the funding to be able to create a new academy to house their growing operations?
I'd say it was largely, again, through private funders, also basically a call to arms in the city. I think this just originally arose when the building was becoming too small for this growing academy. We were originally located on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. We moved again for a slightly larger building to accommodate classes, a growing art collection. And then in 1845, there was a fire that basically destroyed that Chestnut Street building. And it's a pretty incredible story of what was saved from that fire and how Philadelphia firemen basically gathered together to save some of our major works, like these monumental canvases by Benjamin West. And it was really through the city itself that they were funding a new building, and some of those subscriptions as well.
So has the Philadelphian people and the academy always had a positive relationship?
I'd like to say it's really a museum and a collection, an academy for the city in many ways. It is such a regional institution, as much as it was hosting nationally renowned and internationally renowned artists, I should say, American artists. It was really tied to Philadelphia growing as a city. So I always like to think it was a site for patronage by Philadelphians, a site for the public, and it's always had a very much of a positive relationship in the city.
Now, as the city is growing, so is this organization. And in 1876, there was a construction of a new academy. Who was in charge of that construction, and what made this different than the previous home?
But 1876 is really a major moment in Philadelphia. We have the 1876 centennial located in the city, and it's also a moment for PAFA to really celebrate its founding. And PAFA hires Frank Furness, who is a renowned Philadelphia architect working in this Victorian period of time. And he creates this incredible building to really combine a place for exhibiting our collection, our annual exhibitions, but also be teaching students in new facilities. And this building, which we like to call as a jewel box, which is still located on Broad Street, known as our historic landmark building, is basically this combination of international influences and architectural styles. You have Islamic arches, the Gothic revival, European references, and Frank Furness creates this building to basically echo how American art is these mix of styles. And this is such a modern structure for him. He's involving also new engineering and using specific modern tools to create the stairwells and staircases that really wasn't seen yet in American architecture.
Now, you brought up the architecture. How does the architecture of the building really reflect the Academy's mission?
I'd say one is the skylights. It's amazing that these are still skylights that you can go see as you go through our galleries. And even in some of the areas where students would be still studying the plaster casts like they do today. And these are skylights that allow natural light to be filtered through the building. When we think about artists, they're very attentive to the light when they're creating their works of art, especially Northern light. This allows for a focus on the education of these artists, but also an opportunity with this larger space that Frank Furness designs for more works of art to be on view from the collection, but also these large-scale annual exhibitions. And those exhibitions were really spaces for showcasing contemporary American artists. And we always like to say we've been contemporary since 1805. And those exhibitions were running up till 1969, and they were constantly showing basically the who's who of American art when you go through those lists of those who are exhibiting.
And were there any permanent collections on display?
So our collection was always growing at the Academy. So you would have some of those early ones from the early 19th century, and those permanent collections would be on display in our galleries, which are still here today to visit. And they would be on view for really the students and the public to view. The students would go into the galleries with their classes or on their own. They could study from these canvases, from these marble sculptures, and really get firsthand knowledge of some of the contemporary American artists that were entering the collection.
There have been a lot of notable artists from this academy, one being Thomas Eakins. What can you tell me about him?
Thomas Eakins is one that I'd say really stands out in the Academy's history. He starts working there as really one of the key instructors as part of the school at that moment in the late 19th century. And he's a bit of a pivotal and I say also problematic figure. So he's in Paris studying art and comes back to the Academy as an instructor for painting and is really, I'd say, a radical with what he's doing. Previously, it was really focused on copying European works, the plaster casts. But Aikens instead really focuses on a modern studio model of teaching his students as a curriculum. He wants them to look at the actual human body. So that involves life modeling classes where they are not just focusing on copies. Instead, he is bringing models in. He is having the women artists, the female students in these academy classes look at the actual nude body instead, which is quite radical when we think about a Victorian atmosphere in Philadelphia. He's also having a student study cadavers and has a relationship with the medical schools in the city of Philadelphia. And he's quite radical in having this basically circle around him who are gravitating to Aikens as this model of this new realism that's emerging in American art.
Did he influence any other teachers to follow his style of teaching?
I would say definitely. There's, I like to say, almost an Aikens fan club that emerges around him. And you can tell when you go through our collection who some of his students were because they were looking at that very specific, almost realist style that is not through a filtered, idealized lens. He is really focusing on his sitters and what he is seeing in front of him as he's portraying them in front for the canvas. Henry Tanner, who's an early Black American artist in the late 19th century, an early graduate at PAFA, who eventually relocates to France, is one of Aiken's students. But there's also additional Aiken students like some of his contemporaries like Charles Bregler as well, who are really studying around him and then become instructors in the Philadelphia area and have their own basically network of students.
And did Thomas always have a positive relationship with the Academy?
He did not. I probably won't go in today about many of the kind of problematic or issues around Aikens because he is such a pivotal figure for the advancement of American art. But he was eventually dismissed from the Academy because thinking about this late 19th century Victorian environment he was up against, he really wanted to focus on these progressive models of curriculums. And there is a story where he basically removed the loincloth of a male model for the women's life modeling class. These female artists were exposed to this. And this basically at that point was the last straw for the Academy and Aikens, and he was dismissed.
And how does PAFA reflect the growth of modernism in America?
I say by the turn of the century, it's fascinating to see our instructors. You have Arthur B. Carles, Robert Henry, Henry McCarter, these artists who are tied to the Philadelphia area, but are such, I'd say, figures of American modernism. And I also want to highlight that we are also, I think, integral to some of these incredible women artists who are coming out of this period of time. Cecilia Beau is one who really is a proponent of impressionist styles at PAFA, and she's the first full-time female instructor at the Academy in the early 20th century at that time. And with modernism, these artists are instead really thinking about moving away from the Aikens model of realism, the figurative tradition, and they're instead exploring new color palettes, this dynamism, what we associate with the rise of American cities. They're thinking about the world around them now.
And as they're reflecting on the world around them, they're creating these exhibitions. Are there any that come to mind when you're thinking of the modern growth of art?
I definitely always think of the ones really in the 1920s. These are moments when they're focusing on contemporary American artists, showcasing at PAFA in those galleries that you can still visit today and walk through. And they're really packing the spaces with some of these exhibitions, I should say. And in the 1920s, they're also bringing American artists inspired by European models of modernism. But one that specifically stands out is PAFA shows Albert C. Barnes' collection in 1923. And that's very different from how Barnes's collection, which is you can visit today, is received in Philadelphia. PAFA's, I think, is a bit cutting edge and forward thinking for showcasing such a modernist collection by a Philadelphia collector, Dr. Barnes, and it's basically panned in the press and receives an extreme amount of criticism. The Philadelphia Museum of Art dismisses Barnes, and basically that's how he creates his own foundation and collection out in Lower Merion, secreted away from the city. But PAFA was really instrumental in showcasing it to the city in the beginning.
So how did the Academy continue to share stories of America in their art, even during times like World War II?
I think World War II is a fascinating point in our history too, because so many artists were drafted, were going off to war in Europe as well during this period, and they were sending works back just to continue to be exhibited. So it's almost this interesting moment of lull of what can be still exhibited in the Academy spaces and those galleries. So there's poster exhibitions, there's war-related topics in terms of the themes that artists are exploring. Artists who have not received as much perhaps fine arts training now have a chance to show galleries, showcase their work in the galleries when some of these artists are off on the front. This is also an interesting period when we think about our collection, is that many museums, including PAFA, are hiding their collection, basically safeguarding it, I should say, during these periods of time when there's bomb threats along the East Coast. So they send it basically to a bank vault during World War II to protect some of their most prized pieces in the collection.
And in 1955, PAFA created the 150th anniversary exhibition. What can you tell me about this exhibition?
Sure, I think this is a moment when PAFA is celebrating its anniversary. They're thinking, who can I exhibit? Who are those key American artists? And it's this incredible exhibition that I think even what we're working on today mirrors that, where they're showcasing who are those American artists that was formative to a narrative about American art and how we define it. And what's instrumental is that this is not a show that stays at PAFA, but it tours Europe. And I think that's when in the 1950s, we're out of World War II, PAFA is really showcasing that they were in the beginning at the forefront of educating and teaching American artists. And with this exhibition, they can place that on the European world stage too.
You guys have a lot of works, but do you know how many works are currently in PAFA's collection?
I'd say probably roughly over 16,000 works, and that ranges from paintings, sculpture, works on paper, prints, mixed media. I think in the beginning we're very focused on oil on canvas paintings, marble sculptures, but we've now shifted into found objects, fabric, textiles, as we continue to collect contemporary artists.
And what's your role as the curator of historical American art?
At PAFA, I look over the collection from the 18th century to up to World War I. So I'm focusing on artists who are tied to the British colonies in the beginning of time, and then artists in that turn of the century moment where they're starting to explore modernism. And part of my job is taking care of this collection, really, and thinking about new research involving works of art, highlighting artists that are often overlooked in our collection, including some of those women artists or artists of color that were educated at the Academy. But also it's staging exhibitions around our collection. And that's always kind of a wonderful part of my job, is thinking of new exhibition topics to push new scholarship about American art and really highlight PAFA's artists.
And are you excited about any upcoming new exhibits?
I am. So right now we're in the installation of our major exhibition called A Nation of Artists, and this opens on April 12th. And it's a collaborative exhibition between PAFA, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the renowned Middleton Family Collection. And this exhibition is staged at PAFA and the PMA, but in two very different iterations. We'll share our same themes, but at PAFA, we're taking a very thematic approach that you'll see historical and contemporary works alongside each other in pairings to really explore how American art can be in dialogue with each other across generations and centuries. And it's a way for us to also really reinstall our permanent collection and welcome back visitors after a major renovation of that Frank Furness building.
And how often do you set up permanent exhibits, or do you just move in and out as the flow of themes and culture changes throughout the world?
I'd say as curators and working with the curatorial team, we stage exhibitions 5 years out at times to really start working on our research, thinking about perhaps loans involved in an exhibition, focusing on our own permanent collection. What do we want to highlight? But it's also really paying attention, like you said, to what is going on around us. How is culture changing that we want to reflect that in our own exhibitions? And I think with many of our exhibitions at PAFA, it's thinking about how does this tie back to the Academy's mission about cultivating the fine arts in the United States.
And has that mission stayed consistent throughout the change in location, the change in teachers? How has that changes affected the mission overall?
I think the mission has stayed the same, but I think how we define American art has changed drastically from that 1805 moment that Peale and the other artists in Philadelphia wrote about. When they said cultivate the fine arts in the United States, I think they had no idea how expansive that definition would become. I think a big push of my work at PAFA as a curator is to think about and rethink how we think about American art and define it. Who is an American artist? And what are the parameters and geographical boundaries of American art? I like to really push American art into a global context and think about those cross-cultural exchanges. And that has drastically shifted from that 1805 moment. This is such an international country we live in that's very much global, and PAFA continues to reflect that in our exhibitions and even our permanent collection.
We have been speaking with Lea Stephenson, Kenneth R. Woodcock Curator of Historical American Art at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PCN's history and culture content, like the interview you just heard, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Explore other documentary programs, event coverage, and a lot more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.